Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes U.S. show of military strength to China, TikTok CEO's grilling, 7 highlights. Kim Jong Un has broken with decades of North Korean policy, does it mean he's planning for war? With a dire warning, concerns rise about conflict in space with Russia. Before Russia's satellite threat, there were starfish prime, nesting dolls and robotic arms. The U.S. conducted a cyber attack against an Iranian military ship, an official says. U.S. show of military strength to China, TikTok CEO's grilling, 7 highlights. South China Morning Post. The U.S. is likely to deploy almost half of its aircraft carriers in the Western Pacific this year as a signal of deterrence against increasing military activity by China and North Korea in the region, according to analysts. The move comes as tensions rise between the U.S. and China over issues such as trade, human rights, and territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Meanwhile, Singapore's top envoy in Washington has suggested that the recent grilling of TikTok's CEO over his nationality and links to China's Communist Party could undermine perceptions of the U.S. in Singapore. Kim Jong Un has broken with decades of North Korean policy, does it mean he's planning for war? CNN. North Korean leader Kim Jong Un's recent provocations have raised questions about his military intentions. In recent weeks, Kim has brushed aside decades of North Korean policy towards South Korea and called for it to be classified as its permanent enemy. The shift in policy has come alongside a volley of weapons tests, the shelling of a maritime buffer zone and calls from Kim for North Korea to accelerate war preparations in response to confrontation moves by the U.S. Kim's latest policy shift is likely driven by his mounting concerns as South Korea and the U.S. ramp up military drills and coordination. It also coincides with an election year in the U.S., where President Joe Biden seeks a second term while managing multiple global crises. Kim is likely watching carefully, and may be keen to see him replaced by predecessor and candidate Donald Trump. Kim's policy shift on South Korea is part of a broader, fundamental shift in foreign policy, namely giving up normalization of relations with the U.S. through denuclearization and pivoting to China and Russia. That pivot got a major boost in September, when Vladimir Putin welcomed the North Korean leader to Russia for a rare overseas trip. Russia has since fired North Korean-supplied short-range ballistic missiles in its war on Ukraine. Analysts have speculated that Russia has reciprocated with aid for North Korea's spy satellite program. More cooperation with Moscow could also potentially help Kim address chronic food and fuel shortages and build North Korea's economy. China, by far North Korea's most important economic lifeline, remains wary of any moves from Pyongyang that could destabilize or draw more U.S. forces to the region. However, amid rising friction with Washington, Beijing has in recent years blocked U.S.-backed efforts in the United Nations Security Council to censure North Korea, and will look to stay engaged with Pyongyang, especially as it draws closer to Moscow. With a dire warning, concerns rise about conflict in space with Russia. Washington Post. Russia is developing a space-based capability to attack satellites using a nuclear weapon, an aggressive move that has alarmed U.S. national security officials and lawmakers who worry that Russia could interfere with or disable critical communications and intelligence systems, according to people familiar with classified intelligence on the matter. The capability is a nuclear-armed, not a nuclear-powered, weapon, said 2 U.S. officials. Since the start of the war with Ukraine, the use of commercial satellites to track Russian troop movements, provide internet and communication links to the ground, and detect missile firings and guide precision munitions has heightened concerns that Russia might target those systems as well as official U.S. military and intelligence satellites. The International Space Station, which is run jointly by the space agencies of the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan and Canada, would also be affected by a nuclear detonation. But that hasn't stopped Russia's aggressive tactics in space before. In 2021, when Russia blew up the dead satellite, it created a debris field so large it threatened the ISS and forced its occupants, including Russian cosmonauts, to prepare for an emergency evacuation. Before Russia's satellite threat, there were starfish prime, nesting dolls and robotic arms. Associated Press. Reports that Russia may be developing nuclear weapons for use in space have raised concerns about the U.S.'s reliance on satellite communications. If Russia were to use nuclear warheads to destroy U.S. satellites, this could have dramatic consequences, from the failure of home electrical and water systems to the halt of aviation, rail and car traffic. The cell phone network could also be impacted. Although the White House says the danger is not imminent, this is not the first time that a nuclear warhead has been detonated in space. In the 1960s, both Russia and the U.S. detonated nuclear warheads to test how they would behave in Earth's atmosphere. Russia and China have been developing other capabilities to disable or destroy U.S. satellites. Russia has developed a nesting doll satellite, which opens up to reveal a smaller satellite, which in turn opens to reveal a projectile capable of destroying nearby satellites. China has tested a satellite with a robotic arm that can maneuver to a system, grab it, and move it out of orbit. The U.S. conducted a cyber attack against an Iranian military ship, an official says. New York Times. The United States launched a cyber attack on an Iranian military vessel that was gathering intelligence on merchant ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, according to a U.S. military official. The attack was part of the Biden administration's retaliation for a drone attack by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq that killed 3 American soldiers and injured dozens of others. U.S. analysts suspected that the ship, MV Bashad, was spying on nearby ships and passing information to Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. The cyber attack was intended to disrupt the ship's ability to share information with the Houthis. U.S. seizes weapons shipment headed from Iran to Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. Hill. U.S. forces have seized an advanced weapons shipment from Iran that was intended for Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. The weapons shipment, which was found on a vessel, contained over 200 packages of lethal weapons including explosives, anti-tank missile launchers and medium-range ballistic missile components. The U.S. Coast Guard also seized unmanned underwater surface vehicle components and network equipment. CENTCOM Commander Gen. Michael Eric Kurilla said that this was yet another example of Iran's malign activity in the region and that Iran's supply of advanced conventional weapons to the Houthis violated international law and undermined the safety of international shipping. Russia developing troubling anti-satellite weapon. U.S. BBC. The U.S. has accused Russia of developing a new anti-satellite weapon armed with a nuclear warhead, though it has yet to be deployed. The weapon is believed to be space-based and capable of targeting satellites. White House spokesperson John Kirby declined to provide further details on the threat but emphasized that there is no immediate threat to the U.S. public. President Joe Biden has been briefed on the intelligence and has ordered direct diplomatic engagement with Russia over the issue. The U.S. military is heavily reliant on satellite communications for a range of functions, including surveillance, missile launch detection, navigation, and communication. The civilian world also relies on satellites for everyday functions such as GPS-enabled ride-hailing services, weather forecasting, and financial transactions. The US, Russia, and China already have the capability to attack satellites, but the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 prevents them from using nuclear weapons in space. However, experts have warned that the treaty provides no guarantee of safety in the current geopolitical climate, particularly as Russia has shown a disregard for treaties and international norms. LSU RB Trey Hawley arrested in connection with shooting that left 2 people injured. Yahoo! LSU running back Trey Hawley has been arrested and faces 3 charges in connection to a shooting at an apartment complex in Union Parish in northern Louisiana last week that left 2 people injured. Hawley turned himself into authorities on Thursday in connection with the shooting and has been charged with 1 count of attempted second-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated criminal damage to property and 1 count of illegal use of a weapon, according to the Advocate in Baton Rouge. Evening update: Israeli forces storm main hospital in southern Gaza to search for hostages' remains. The Globe and Mail. Israeli forces have raided the main hospital in southern Gaza in order to search for the remains of hostages taken by Hamas. The military said that it had credible intelligence that Hamas had held hostages at Nasser Hospital and that the hostages' remains might still be inside. The raid followed Israeli fire at the hospital that killed 1 patient and wounded 6 others. The hospital had been under siege for a week with hundreds of staff, patients and others inside. The hospital has been struggling under heavy fire as crucial supplies dwindled. The risk of the conflict widening grew as Hezbollah fired rockets at northern Israel in response to the killing of 10 civilians in southern Lebanon, which was the deadliest day for Lebanese casualties since the cross-border fighting began. SpaceX Starship rocket launch site at Cape Canaveral? Air Force studying potential impacts. Yahoo! U.S. Air Force officials are studying the potential environmental impacts of a future SpaceX launch site supporting Starship heavy-lift rocket operations at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The Air Force will conduct 3 public meetings in March to present information on SpaceX's proposed actions and alternatives, answer questions, and collect comments. Hello, I'm Dr. Six, your trusted observer from the 6th dimension. Today, I bring you 7 highlights from around the world, touching on military tensions, foreign policy shifts, cyber attacks, weapons seizures, and more. Let's dive in. In the first news, the U.S. is flexing its military muscle in the Western Pacific by deploying almost half of its aircraft carriers. This move is aimed at deterring China and North Korea's increasing military activity in the region. Tensions between the US and China have been rising over trade, human rights, and territorial disputes. Meanwhile, Singapore's perception of the US could be undermined by the recent grilling of TikTok's CEO over his nationality and links to China's Communist Party. Next, we turn to North Korean leader Kim Jong Un's recent provocations, which have raised questions about his military intentions. Kim's shift in policy towards South Korea, accompanied by weapons tests and calls for war preparations, is likely driven by concerns over US military drills and coordination. Furthermore, Kim's foreign policy has shifted towards China and Russia, seeking aid and economic cooperation. China remains wary of any destabilizing moves by North Korea but has blocked US-backed efforts to censure Pyongyang in recent years. Moving on, concerns are rising about conflict in space with Russia. Classified intelligence suggests that Russia is developing a space-based capability to attack satellites using nuclear weapons. This aggressive move has alarmed US national security officials and lawmakers. The International Space Station and critical communications and intelligence systems could be targeted. Russia has a history of aggressive tactics in space, including blowing up a dead satellite and creating a debris field threatening the ISS. Speaking of space, reports of Russia developing nuclear weapons for use in space have raised concerns about the US's reliance on satellite communications. The failure of satellite systems could have dramatic consequences, affecting everything from home electrical and water systems to aviation and cell phone networks. China has also developed capabilities to disable or destroy US satellites, with a nesting doll satellite and a robotic arm for satellite manipulation. In cyber news, the United States has launched a cyber attack on an Iranian military vessel gathering intelligence on merchant ships. This attack was part of the Biden administration's retaliation for a drone attack by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. The ship was suspected of spying on nearby ships and passing information to Houthi rebels in Yemen. The cyber attack aimed to disrupt the ship's ability to share information with the rebels. Moving to Yemen, US forces have seized an advanced weapons shipment from Iran intended for Houthi-controlled areas. The shipment contained lethal weapons, including explosives and missile components. This seizure is another example of Iran's malign activity in the region, violating international law and undermining the safety of international shipping. Lastly, the US has accused Russia of developing a new anti-satellite weapon armed with a nuclear warhead. While the weapon has yet to be deployed, it poses a threat to satellites that are crucial for functions such as surveillance, navigation, and communication. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 prevents the use of nuclear weapons in space, but experts warn that the treaty provides no guarantee of safety given the current geopolitical climate. That wraps up our 7 highlights. Now it's your turn, dear viewers. What are your thoughts on these developments? Are you concerned about the escalating tensions and potential conflicts? Share your ideas, and let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.